that you were when you left.
Christopher Nolan doesn't just release movies, he creates global events. Even if you don't watch many movies, you definitely know him for something. Maybe it's a grand movie like The Dark Knight, or a serious movie like Oppenheimer. His movies are the ones that everyone talks about for weeks. You either think he is the best filmmaker alive, or you think he's totally overrated. But either way, you're definitely watching. So with his new film in theaters, today we're gonna take a journey through Christopher Nolan's movies. Since Nolan loves to mess with time, we're gonna do the same. We'll jump from his latest masterpieces back to his earliest indie roots, back and forth until we piece together his obsession. We're skipping the fluff and going straight into the brain melters, the twists, the endings, and then one controversial masterpiece. And by the end, we'll figure out what makes Nolan one of the few directors that creates a massive cinematic event. So strap in and enjoy. The lights dimmed, the 70mm IMAX projector hummed to life, and for the first time in years, I wasn't just watching a movie, I was inside Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Ever since Oppenheimer, I've been trying to get tickets and failing every single time. Finally, sitting in that theater made the wait completely worth it. It's so massive and sharp that you actually forget you're sitting in a room with 300 other people. Over the past few months, the online conversation around The Odyssey was frankly exhausting. Before anyone had even seen the movie, people were tearing it apart over the casting, the historical accuracy, the story, and pretty much everything else. It reminded me a lot of what happened with Superman last year, where the discourse became louder than the film itself. But once you stop listening to the internet noise and actually look at the screen, you realize the real story is how Nolan actually built this world. If you want to understand why The Odyssey works so well, start with how it was made. Nolan has always championed shooting on film, but this time, he pushes it even further by capturing the entire movie on 70mm IMAX film. Watching this on the big screen was like watching the Mona Lisa being painted. Every crashing wave, every landscape, and every burst of color feels impossibly rich. It isn't just visually impressive, it pulls you directly into Odysseus' journey in a way that digital filmmaking cannot do. That extends to the practical filmmaking as well. While most blockbusters rely heavily on CGI, Christopher Nolan continues to chase realism whenever possible. Take this Cyclops sequence. Most studios would have built a green screen set and added everything in later, but Nolan filmed inside a real cave where the actors could physically interact with the environment. Even Polyphemus was brought to life using animatronics, puppetry, and a massive 60-foot mechanical rig. That physical presence gives every performance more weight, making the danger feel tangible for both the cast and the audience. Speaking of the cast, this is one of Christopher Nolan's strongest ensembles yet. Matt Damon is outstanding as Odysseus because at its core, this is a story about a man desperately trying to return home to his family. Damon has played similar roles before, but what makes this performance stand out is how grounded it feels. You can see the guilt, the trauma, and the exhaustion behind every decision, creating a version of Odysseus that feels deeply human instead of mythical. Tom Holland and Anne Hathaway are equally impressive as Telemachus and Penelope. Holland finally gets another dramatic role that reminds people how talented he is beyond Spider-Man. His determination to find his father while protecting Ithaca gives the story real emotional momentum, while Anne Hathaway once again proves why she works so well with Nolan. She captures Penelope's heartbreak and resilience perfectly, a woman refusing to surrender the life she's fought to preserve. I wouldn't be surprised if this performance becomes a part of the Oscar conversation and maybe even win. The supporting cast, it works exactly the way most Christopher Nolan ensembles do. It's packed with A-list talent, even if some actors don't get much screen time. Zendaya only appears in a handful of scenes, which is surprising considering how much Nolan praised her beforehand. But the real scene stealer? Someone I did not see coming at all, Samantha Morton. Her playing Cersei and me thinking it was the best performance was not on my bingo card, I have to say. She delivers a scene so unsettling that it makes me want to see Nolan direct a full horror movie. The rest are all just having a blast and giving it their all. From Robert Pattinson to Lupita Nyong'o, John Leguizamo, John Bernthal, and Charlize Theron, they all have a lasting impression. But this video is really about Christopher Nolan's fascination with time, and The Odyssey continues that obsession. Rather than telling Homer's story in a straightforward way, Nolan embraces another non-linear structure, constantly moving between different moments in Odysseus' journey. It's classic Nolan filmmaking, using fractured timelines to deepen the emotional impact instead of simply confusing the audience. The monster encounters become more than spectacle, they reflect the lasting trauma of war and everything Odysseus carries with him. However, I do have some minor issues with the film. Nolan's sound mixing is still incredibly loud. If you thought it was overwhelming before, wait until you experience it in 70mm IMAX. Ludwig Göransson's score is excellent, but compared to his other work with Nolan or even other filmmakers like Ryan Coogler, it's not at that level. And the opening stretch also takes a little longer than necessary to find its rhythm before the story fully sets in. But that's it. Outside of that, I absolutely love the Odyssey. It might be a recency bias, but I generally think this belongs in Christopher Nolan's top 3 films. It's remarkable watching a filmmaker constantly deliver movies at this level. Between the non-linear storytelling, practical effects, breathtaking Imax cinematography, unforgettable performances, and emotional core, almost everything lands exactly as intended. More than anything, it feels like the work of a director making the movie he's always wanted to make. So I'm gonna give the Odyssey a 9.5 out of 10. Before we continue with the rest of the video, if you're the kind of person who wants to understand why a movie or TV show works, not just whether it's good or bad, you're in the right place. So make sure to subscribe to the channel. That's exactly what we do here every single week. Okay, let's talk about Memento. Before he was making $200 million blockbusters, Nolan proved he can melt our brains with nothing but a Polaroid camera and a gun. That movie was Memento. The opening alone is legendary. A gun goes off, a man drops dead, and somehow the scene plays in reverse. No context, no explanation, just confusion and tension. Within minutes, Nolan hooks you into one of the greatest psychological mysteries ever made. A move that few of his openings can rarely do. What makes Memento so fascinating is how the structure puts you inside Leonard Shelby's broken mind. Leonard suffers from short-term memory loss, so the movie itself becomes fragmented. The black and white scenes move forward in time, while the color scenes move backwards, forcing you to piece together the truth exactly like he does. Today that sounds like peak Nolan, but in 2000 this storytelling felt revolutionary. After his directorial debut with Following, this was the movie where Nolan truly leveled up as a filmmaker. And then you have Leonard himself. Guy Pearce gives one of the most underrated performances in any Nolan movie. Pearce has actually said recently that he didn't think he was good in this role, which saying that out loud just sounds crazy because he completely sells Leonard's paranoia, confusion, and obsession. Every scene keeps you guessing whether Leonard understands what's happening or if he's lying to himself. That uncertainty is what makes it one of Nolan's most layered protagonists. It's not just the Guy Pearce show though. The rest of the cast is just as intense. Carrie-Anne Moss is fantastic here because she gets to play against expectations. Unlike Trinity in The Matrix, this character feels unpredictable, manipulative, and emotionally dangerous. You never fully understand her, and that tension adds so much to the mystery. Joe Pantoliano also steals scenes as Teddy, a character who constantly blurs the line between helping Leonard and exploiting him. The thing is that everyone in this movie is basically a bad person. Teddy manipulates Leonard for his own gain, Natalie uses him when he benefits her, and even Leonard himself becomes unreliable. Then you have Sandy Jenkins, who's both a warning sign and a mirror to Leonard's own reality. Every character serves a central theme. Memory can be manipulated, and truth is whatever people choose it to be. The screenplay is where Memento becomes something special. This was Nolan's first Oscar-nominated script, and for good reason. The movie works as both a psychological thriller and a detective story, where the audience becomes the investigator. Every conversation, every photograph, every tattoo matters. Seriously, put your phone away for this one. Beneath the mystery, the film explores trauma, memory, and the lies people tell themselves to survive. That's what gives this movie staying power on rewatch. Visually, this movie also is a huge turning point because it started Nolan's iconic collaboration with Wally Pfister. The harsh lighting, grainy textures, and black and white imagery became the blueprint for the grounded visual style Nolan would later perfect in movies like The Dark Knight. You can literally see the foundation of his future career starting here. However, I would be lying if I said it was all perfect. First, you can tell Nolan was still developing his editing style because some transitions feel abrupt and messy.
What the fuck?
Second, the sound mix can be rough at times with dialogue that, while not deal breakers, do occasionally get drowned out. The technically polished style we know and love isn't fully there yet. But even with all of that, this movie gets better every time you watch it. That's honestly one of the defining traits of the best Christopher Nolan movies. The first viewing leaves you confused, the second reveals hidden layers, and the third makes you realize how carefully everything was constructed from the beginning. So for me, every time I rewatch this, or honestly any of his films, my opinion changes or I learn something new, because the deeper themes hit way harder once you know the truth. This is the movie where Nolan's signature style, non-linear storytelling, psychological depth, moral ambiguity, and shocking reveals truly came alive. It's basically the blueprint for the filmmaker he would become. So I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. If the Odyssey and Memento represent Christopher Nolan at the peak of his filmmaking ability, then Tenet represents what happens when his biggest obsession, time itself, becomes its biggest weakness. For years, I have desperately tried to understand why people love this movie so much. Every time I go online, I see fans praise Tenet as one of Nolan's most ambitious films. But after multiple rewatches, I have to say it. This is not one of his best movies. It's proof that even one of the greatest directors working today can sometimes have a bad day at the office. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and say that Tenet has no strengths. John David Washington and Robert Pattinson have incredible chemistry, and their relationship carry a large portion of the movie. Their dynamic gives the film a grounded energy that helps balance out the massive scale of a spy thriller. The practical effects, cinematography, and Ludwig Göransson's score are all outstanding. If you look at this from a technical filmmaking perspective, Tenet is a masterpiece. But when you look at the film as a complete story, everything outside of this spectacle becomes messy, confusing, and frustrating. The biggest issue comes back to the central theme of this video, Christopher Nolan's fascination with time. The entire plot revolves around time inversions, a concept that allows characters to move backwards through time to prevent a future catastrophe. The problem is that once you actually sit down and analyze how the rules of Tenet time travel work, the entire concept starts to fall apart. The explanation of inverted entropy is incredibly complicated, and even real-world scientists have pointed out how questionable the science behind it is. Nolan attempts to combine realistic filmmaking with mind-bending time concepts, and it reaches its breaking point here. The writing is also where Tenet struggles the most. Nolan has always relied heavily on exposition, but usually that exposition supports emotional storytelling. Here we spend most of the movie listening to characters explain complicated rules and endless mythology that never creates a strong connection to the story. Instead of making the world deeper, it often feels like information being delivered for the sake of information. And on top of that, the infamous sound mixing makes it even harder, because many crucial lines are buried underneath the overwhelming score and action. But the biggest problem with Tenet is the lack of an emotional foundation. This is the anti-Inception. In Inception, Nolan created a complicated time-related story, but he gave audiences a character they cared about. Cobb's trauma and his guilt and his desire to return to his children gave the movie its own emotional power. In Tenet, we barely know anything about John David Washington's protagonist, including the fact he's literally only called the protagonist. Because why not? His relationship with Kat, played brilliantly by Elizabeth Debicki, feels underdeveloped, leaving the only chemistry between Robert Pattinson and Washington as the emotional anchor. And for a movie this massive with this much lore, that is not enough to carry the entire film. Now I know the common defense of Tenet is that you need to watch it multiple times before it clicks. And believe me, I have tried. I have watched this movie several times, maybe more than any film in this video, studied the details, and attempted to understand Nolan's vision. But after all of that, the movie still does not fully work for me. Tenet is Christopher Nolan reaching for something incredibly ambitious and failing to make all the pieces come together. However, I will give credit for one thing. Nolan is still trying to create something new instead of repeating himself. So at least there's that. At the end of the day, Tenet is a perfectly average Christopher Nolan film. The ambition is undeniable, but the execution cannot match the scale of the idea. When a filmmaker becomes more focused on the mechanics of time than the characters experiencing it, the result is not evolution, it becomes the story consuming itself. Tenet shows that even a legendary director like Nolan can miss the mark. So I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 10. Now we're entering Christopher Nolan's elite tier with what might be his most ambitious movie ever, Inception. Nolan spent nearly a decade developing this sci-fi masterpiece, and you can tell that everything has a level of care for each shot. He took a simple heist premise and transformed it into a mind-bending thriller about dreams, time, guilt, and the nature of reality. What makes Inception so brilliant is that beneath all of its layered complexity, it tells a deeply emotional story. The famous dreams within a dream concept could have been overwhelming, but Nolan grounds every level with clear rules, rich world building, and constant tension. As the dreams become deeper, time stretches further, the stakes grow higher, and every sequence feels both spectacular and believable. But the real heart of Inception is Dom Cobb. Leonardo DiCaprio delivers one of the strongest performances in any Christopher Nolan film. Cobb isn't just stealing secrets, he's a grieving husband and desperate father, fighting his own guilt while trying to return to his children. That emotional journey gives the movie lasting weight beyond its incredible sci-fi concepts. It's why, even with all the dream logic, you're still rooting for him just to get home. Then there's the action scenes. The rotating hallway fight remains one of the greatest practical effects scenes ever filmed. Instead of relying on CGI, Christopher Nolan built a full-rate rotating corridor. You feel that set rotating like you're right there with the actors being tossed around. Even the lighting inside the set was practical. That commitment to practical filmmaking gives every scene in the Inception an intensity that still stands out today. What also separates Inception from many of Nolan's darker films is the sense of hope. Beneath the dream mechanics and science fiction ideas, the story is ultimately about accepting loss, letting go of guilt, and choosing reality over illusion. It's an emotional payoff that often gets overlooked because of the film's complexity, and nothing captures that wonder more than the music. Hans Zimmer delivers one of the greatest movie scores ever composed. Time isn't just one of the most iconic film soundtracks ever written, it completely transformed the ending into something unforgettable. Even people who aren't fans of Inception usually agree that Zimmer's score is extraordinary. And speaking of the ending, the spinning top remains one of the most debated endings in movie history. Was Cobb still dreaming? Or had he finally returned to reality? Christopher Nolan leaves just enough ambiguity to keep audiences discussing the film years later. But for me, the real answer doesn't matter. What matters is that Cobb finally finds his own peace. However, I do have one problem, that is some logic can be wobbly in certain moments. This is where you see what Tenet became. When the logic of the dream worlds gets so convoluted and can be messy and really confusing. Like, I remember watching this with my friends and they had no idea what it was about. At the end of the day, it's not for everyone. It works because of the characters, but it can be jarring at times. But even then, for me, Inception remains one of Christopher Nolan's greatest movies and most discussed films. It blends mind-bending sci-fi concepts, unforgettable action, emotional storytelling, Hans Zimmer's legendary score, and an ending that still fuels debates today. So I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. Most war movies are about history, but Christopher Nolan turned Dunkirk into a ticking time bomb. Instead of using time as a puzzle to solve like Memento or Inception, Nolan uses it to immerse us into the chaos of war. This isn't just a World War II movie about the Dunkirk evacuation, it's an experiment in perspective, survival, and how time feels different depending on where you are. It's Nolan proving that his obsession with time can reshape even the historical war genre. The way he does that is brilliant. Rather than relying on traditional nonlinear storytelling, Dunkirk is split into 3 different timelines and they unfold simultaneously. The land story spans 1 week, the siege takes place over 1 day, and the air just lasts 1 hour. Yet by the end, all 3 collide into one unforgettable climax. For a pilot, an hour feels endless. For a stranded soldier, a week feels like a lifetime. It's one of the clearest examples of Nolan using time as an emotional storytelling device instead of a narrative gimmick. The cast is another reason as to why Dunkirk works so well. Alongside established actors like Tom Hardy, Cillian Murphy, Kenneth Branagh, and Mark Rylance, Nolan decided to change pace and decided to gamble on unknown actors, and the results were stellar. Finn Whitehead, Tom Glencarney, Jack Lodwin, and Barry Keoghan all deliver grounded performances that avoid typical war movie cliches. Even Harry Styles is surprisingly effective. Nolan has said he didn't know who Styles was during auditions, and that decision pays off because he never feels like a celebrity cameo, he simply feels like another soldier trying to survive. Visually, Dunkirk is an absolute win. By this point, Christopher Nolan and cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytema had fully found their rhythm, and compared to Interstellar, their collaboration feels even more confident. Every frame is dark, immersive, and built for the Imax screen. The sound design deserves just as much credit. The constant ticking clock creates relentless tension that rarely lets up. The only downside is a familiar Nolan criticism: the dialogue can sometimes get buried beneath the overwhelming mix. But those actors work best when they're inhabiting the world around them. As pure spectacle, Dunkirk is a 10 out of 10. Nolan once again leans heavily on practical effects instead of CGI, and that commitment is visible in every scene. The actors sat inside real fighter planes, struggled through freezing water, and worked around genuine explosions whenever possible. When Cillian Murphy looks exhausted and frozen, that's not acting, that is real physical discomfort. They sank actual ships, used authentic aircraft, and created a level of realism that makes every sequence feel immediate. It's blockbuster filmmaking that earns its intensity instead of generating it with computers. Then there's Hans Zimmer's score. This will be the final Christopher Nolan film scored by Zimmer before scheduling conflicts with Dune kept him from working on Tenet, making Dunkirk the end of an incredible creative partnership. It may not be as iconic as Interstellar, Inception, or the Dark Knight trilogy, but it perfectly serves the film. Driven by tempo, tension, and the illusion of constantly accelerating time. The music never lets your heartbeat settle. you may need to go to the doctor after the third act kicks in. That said, Dunkirk isn't flawless. At just 106 minutes, it's one of Christopher Nolan's shortest films, and you definitely feel that pace. The movie throws you straight into the action and rarely slows down, which is incredible from its momentum, but leaves some of the characters feeling underdeveloped. When the film is firing on all cylinders, it's unforgettable. When it isn't, the emotional impacts can feel a little distant. And while some viewers wanted more dialogue, I actually think some of the film benefits from saying less. So where do I land? As a filmmaking achievement, Dunkirk is exceptional. It's visually breathtaking, technically ambitious, another showcase of Christopher Nolan's obsession with time and large-scale practical filmmaking. As a character-driven story though, it feels more like the outline of something great than a fully realized emotional journey. Even so, its strength outweigh its flaws, and it's easy to see why it earned Nolan his first Best Director nomination. So I'm gonna give Dunkirk an 8 out of 10. You may look at Interstellar and see a sci-fi masterpiece, when it's more about Christopher Nolan desperately trying to understand time. It is the peak of his obsession, the movie where everything he does well comes together into one unforgettable experience. And ironically, it's the least Nolan movie. People who normally criticize his cold, intellectual style often point to Interstellar as being their favorite because beneath all of the science fiction and spectacle is something surprisingly emotional and hopeful. The movie establishes that immediately. One of the first major scenes follows Cooper heading into a parent-teacher conference before suddenly abandoning it to chase a mysterious drone through the endless cornfields. In a few minutes, Nolan tells us everything we need to know about this character. Cooper is a man who longs for the discovery in a world that stopped dreaming. Even the practical cornfields used through production make the world feel authentic and lived in, grounding the story before it even leaves Earth. But this is still a Christopher Nolan film, which means science matters. Working alongside physicist Kip Thorne, Nolan builds Interstellar around real scientific theories. The time dilation on Miller's planet, where hours equal years back on Earth, is based on genuine physics. Basically, a long lunch on Miller's planet means your kids have basically already graduated college and already have kids. It's terrifying. The wormhole, the black hole, and the exploration of space all feel believable because they're rooted in real scientific concepts. The result is a sci-fi epic that feels astonishingly grounded despite its massive scale. From a filmmaking standpoint, this is Nolan operating at the highest level. It marked his first collaboration with cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytema and helped redefine the visual style of his career. Shot largely on Imax 65mm film, every shot feels enormous. The dust storms, the alien worlds, the Endurance spaceship, and the vast emptiness of space all look breathtaking. When you see the aspect ratio shift, something that can be a headache to the audience, you feel the whole universe swallow you whole, making every major sequence feel larger than life. Then there's the music. Hans Zimmer has created countless iconic scores, but Interstellar might be his masterpiece. The organ-driven soundtrack adds urgency, wonder, and emotion to every sequence. My personal favorite is the docking scene, because it remains one of the most thrilling moments Nolan has ever directed, with Zimmer's score transforming an already incredible scene into something unforgettable. Every note reinforces that feeling that time is slipping away while hope still remains. But Zimmer's organ isn't just there for scale. It's the heartbeat of the movie's real story, the bond between Cooper and his daughter Murph. This is the real reason to watch this film. Everything revolves around that connection. When Cooper watches years of messages and realizes he missed his children's lives, it's devastating. Matthew McConaughey delivers one of the strongest performances of his career in that one scene, and it's the emotional core that powers the entire movie. What makes Interstellar special is that ultimately it isn't about black holes, space travel, or scientific discovery. It's about love, family, and human connection. On paper, that shouldn't work in a hard science fiction story, but Nolan commits to it completely, and it becomes the foundation that holds the entire film together. Science creates the spectacle, but the relationship gives it meaning. That's also what separates Interstellar from much of Nolan's filmography. Despite depicting a dying Earth and humanity's possible extinction, the film is driven by hope rather than despair. It's a story about resilience, sacrifice, and the belief that people can overcome impossible odds when they work together. That sense of optimism feels almost Spielberg-like, which is fitting since Steven Spielberg himself was originally supposed to direct this project. Now, to some, this may not be their favorite, and I can understand why. The sound mix can be overwhelming at times, and the exposition-heavy approach won't work for everyone. But for me, those elements enhance the experience rather than hurt it. They pull you deeper into the world and make the emotional payoffs hit even harder. That's why Interstellar sits at the top of my Christopher Nolan Mount Rushmore. It's the perfect balance of science, spectacle, emotion, and ambition. Beneath the breathtaking visuals and mind-bending concepts is a deeply human story about love transitioning distance, time, and even limits of our understanding. For me, it's Nolan's magnum opus. So I'm gonna give it a 10 out of 10. In a world with movies that feel designed to move chess pieces around for the next streaming hit, Christopher Nolan never caved to that. He doesn't just make movies about time, he makes something he is passionate about. There is a reason everyone lines up for his movies. Because he makes art. When he drops a film, we are all there to see what he's about to do. Because he chooses stories he believes he can provide care and craftsmanship and turn into something special. Christopher Nolan doesn't just use time to tell a story, he uses it to break your brain. Whether it's the fractured memories of Memento, the layered dreams of Inception, the way Interstellar uses time to break your heart, the war of Dunkirk, the inverted mechanics of Tenet, or the mythological journey of the Odyssey. Nolan keeps asking the same question from different angles. How does time shape who we are? Sometimes, those experiments create masterpieces. Sometimes, they become too ambitious for their own good, but they're never ordinary. That's why every new Christopher Nolan movie feels like an event. You aren't just watching a story unfold, you're solving a puzzle while experiencing it. In my eyes, it's fascinating to see how that obsession has evolved. Memento introduced the blueprint, Inception redefined it, Interstellar gave it a heart, Dunkirk used it for the conflict at hand, Tenet pushed it to its absolute limit, and the Odyssey feels like the final boss of everything he's been building towards. Very few directors are willing to take these kinds of creative risks at this scale, and even fewer can get the audience around the world to spend weeks debating a single ending, a single idea, or even a single frame. Love him or hate him, he isn't just doing this for the sake of being clever, he's doing it to change the way we view this summer blockbuster. Anyway, that is it for Christopher Nolan's obsession with time. Now I want to hear from you guys. What is your favorite Christopher Nolan movie? Are you like me and prefer the heart of Interstellar? Or do you think the Odyssey is his best work? Let me know in the comments down below because I'm genuinely curious to see what you guys think. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for future videos and share this with another movie fan. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, take care.